my pleasure to introduce our honored guest. What he doesn't know, but many of you do know, is that I've been trying to get him to be our guest for several years. And so it's a great honor that as I end my presidency of New Mexico Press Women, that I get to introduce our esteemed guest, who I've read many of his books and I've been an admirer of his. And I've particularly appreciated the fact that he creates these very strong female characters, even if he kills them off at the end, and in unexpected ways. They're very strong. And as we were preparing for this conference, I was sending out emails to our members, and one of them was things you don't know about our speaker, including the fact that he graduated summa cum laude from, with a degree in journalism from Northwestern University. He has a master's degree from Northwestern University, and he was honored to have an honorary doctorate in journalism from Northwestern University. He is an amazing creator. He's been around for quite a while, working on various television shows, from Beauty and the Beast to the revival of the Twilight Zone, to most recently with Dark Winds. He has worked with our Anne Hillerman, who I've introduced earlier today as one of our members who's been a member for 44 years, and she's held every officer position: president, secretary, vice president, except treasurer. And so they've been working together on Dark Winds, and I was informed that they've just won a huge award, the Wrangler Award. So congratulations, Anne, and congratulations to our esteemed guest. Many of you are most familiar with our esteemed guest from reading his books related to A Song of Fire and Ice. I read all 5 of those, and they were thrilling, riveting, and I was so impressed by his ability to braid multiple stories and keep you enraptured at the same time. I also came to love the television series, though I was very disappointed when he killed off one of my favorite characters within the first couple of episodes. How dare he kill off Ned Stark and put his head on a spike. But, you know, eventually as the show evolved, I see that had to happen in order for the rest of the characters to get on the journeys that they needed to be on. He has been involved in many interesting endeavors. I am on the board of the Authors Guild, and he's joined us in a lawsuit over AI and the use of fictional characters. He's also very involved in fighting the fight against banned books, and his, as I mentioned earlier, his bookstore carries many of these banned books. And last summer, during the Writers Guild strike, he was out on the picket lines, front and center with the writers. So it is my great honor to introduce to you, to New Mexico Press Women and Friends, George R.R. Martin.
Get around here and sit. Yeah. Well, thank you for that. I will say, you know, yes, we did cut Ned Stark's head off and put it on a spike, but to be fair, I also wanted my head to be on a spike next to them. You know, there's a scene where they have Ned's head on the spike, and all of the people work for him, and Joffrey brings Sansa out and says, "Oh, look at all the heads of your father and all those people." I was going to be one of the other.
Sorry, closer. Closer, sorry.
Okay. I feel like I'm kissing it now. I was going to be one of the other heads on the spike, And I thought that would be cool. And then afterwards, I would brought that home as a souvenir. Everybody wants one, their own severed head to put on the mantle next to your awards and stuff like that. Unfortunately, this was the first season of the show, and our budget wasn't as big as it later became. And I had no idea how much those damn severed heads cost. And they came to me and said, George, we can't afford to give you a severed head. It's too expensive. Instead, but they were punished for it because they still needed severed heads, so they bought a box of used severed heads from some other show. And that was very cheap. We got these huge severed heads, and we mounted them on the wall, which would have been fine. I don't know where these severed heads came from or what show had previously had them. And you may be shocked to hear this, but one of those severed heads was George W. Bush. And he was bald and was not immediately recognizable, so we were fine. We were fine until they released the Blu-ray with commentary. And of course, the idiot director said, oh, look, have you noticed 2 heads down from Ned? That's George W. Bush's severed head. And then Rush Limbaugh got hold of it, and suddenly it blew up, and there were, these radio talk show hosts demanding we've been canceled immediately, we killed the president, no disrespect, etc. I'm saying we didn't kill him, some other show killed him. We just bought a box of heads. But they did edit it, so it's not, if you buy a DVD or Blu-ray now, it's not George W. Bush. It's some other guy, I don't know. You have to get the original collector's item DVD if you want to see George W. Bush's head on, but it should have been my head, and I still don't have my head. Anyway, thank you so much for the kind introduction, and for honoring me with what I'm told is the Courageous Communicator Award. I'm actually not sure that I'm worthy of that award, but it's nice to have. I have won quite a few awards in my time, going all the way back to kindergarten, where I won an art award for drawing a horse. I still have it. I have all my awards. Honestly, I'm not sure how that happened, since I'm really not much of an artist, and I doubt I was any better when I was 5. I did draw a very detailed horse, though. I gave him a mane, saddle, tail, reins, everything. Now, I had never actually ridden a horse, or even seen one, because we didn't have a lot of horses in Bayonne, New Jersey, where I grew up in the projects. But my father loved Westerns, so I watched a lot of Westerns on TV. And I still remember the words to many of the old Western theme songs. Well, some of the words. And sometimes, after drinking too many beers, I can be persuaded to sing some of them, sadly. We do not want to encourage that, however, because my singing is even worse than my drawing. It has been, it pains me to admit, some 70 years since I drew that horse in kindergarten, and I've won quite a few awards in the intervening decades, most of them for writing. I think I'm safe in saying that I write a lot better than I draw or sing. I've won 8 Hugo Awards, 2 Nebulas, 1 Bram Stoker Award, 2 World Fantasy Awards, the second of which was for Lifetime Achievement, which was almost as chilling as it was flattering, since neither my achievement nor my lifetime is done yet, or so I tell myself. Those are the biggies in science fiction, fantasy, and horror, the fields where I spent most of my career. So I have been very well recognized. And to be sure, I've lost a lot more Hugos and Nebulas and such than I ever won. That's fine though. It is an honor just to be nominated. I learned that line the night I lost my first Hugo in 1974, and have repeated it many times since. Sometimes through gritted teeth and insincere smiles, admittedly. But it is an honor just to be nominated. So many brilliant writers never get that recognition, not even once. In television and film, a field I stumbled into in 1986, shows that I've been a part of have won 4 Emmy Awards, a Golden Globe, and now 2 Wranglers. Though those were for the shows, not for me personally. Me personally has twice been a finalist for the Writers Guild Award and lost both times. But hey, it is an honor just to be nominated. Now, there are those who say that awards are meaningless, especially writing awards, that art cannot be judged, whether by a jury or by popular vote. They're not entirely wrong. All of us can look back and point to great books and movies and television shows that never won a damn thing, and lesser works that did win and shouldn't have, in our opinion, anyway. We all have played that game, including me. Generally, though, I approve of awards. They are not the ultimate arbiter of quality. They never were, never will be. At base, they're no more than a pat on the back. You did good, they tell the winners and the losers. It is an honor just to be nominated, remember. They get people talking about books or films or television, which to my mind is always a good thing. If the award is first place in a chili cook-off, they get people talking about chili. Should it have an E or an I, Texas or New Mexico, beans or no beans, red or green, how hot should it be? It does not matter what the award is for, the conversation is the point. It works the same way. I was a shy and insecure child back on the projects. Winning that art award for my horse was the most exciting thing that had ever happened to me. Years later, in junior high, I started publishing superhero stories and comic book fanzines. And the readers started saying they liked them. That thrilled me too. One of my text stories, as they called them, since I wasn't an artist, even won an Alley Award, named after Alley Oop, which you've never heard of, and I never actually received. But winning it made me want to write more stories. Would there have ever been a Game of Thrones if Power Man versus the Blue Barrier had not won an Alley Award? I don't know. Awards could be especially meaningful for children, I think. They say, you're good at this, whether this is writing or drawing or dancing or cooking chili. And that encourages the kids to do more. Though I have to say, I hate the idea of participation trophies. That's a scam, and the kids see through it too. If every kid in my kindergarten class had gotten the same award I did, my pin would have been meaningless. Why fret and sweat to go to best horse if even the worst horse gets the same award? The honor you have bestowed on me tonight, however, is different from anything I have ever won or lost previously. Courageous Communicator carries a different sort of weight than Best Short Story of the previous year, or Outstanding Television Drama, or even Spiciest Bowl of Chili. This is an honor that made me ponder, an important honor, for we are living in times that are in dire need of courageous communicators. I've given a lot of thought to what sort of keynote speech I should give here tonight. George Orwell once said, if liberty means anything at all, it means the right to tell people what they do not want to hear. Orwell also introduced the world to newspeak, a simplified version of English designed to limit freedom of thought. You cannot think it if there is no word for it, or if the word means the opposite of what you want to say. Black is white in newspeak. Freedom is slavery. The Ministry of Truth rewrites histories, inserting lies. The Ministry of Peace wages war. The Ministry of Love handles torture. Orwell published 1984 in 1949. That was the same year that our Department of War, which dated back to the days of George Washington, was renamed the Department of Defense. I sometimes wonder if that was Orwell's inspiration for newspeak. Orwell is one of my heroes. He told us what was coming. Kurt Vonnegut is another one of my heroes. In his novel, God Bless You, Mr. Rosewater, the protagonist turns up at the Milford Writers' Workshop, a famous gathering of science fiction writers, and says, I love you sons of bitches. You're all I read anymore. You're the only ones who talk about the really terrific changes going on. The only ones crazy enough to know that life is a space voyage, and not a short one either, but one that'll last for billions of years. You're the only ones with guts enough to really care about the future, who really notice what machines do to us, what wars do to us, what cities do to us, what big, simple ideas do to us, what tremendous misunderstandings, mistakes, accidents, and catastrophes do to us. You're the only ones zany enough to agonize over time and distances without limit, over mysteries that will never die, over the fact that we are right now determining whether the space voyage for the next billion years or so is going to be heaven or hell. Would it surprise you to know that every science fiction writer I've ever met loves that speech? Vonnegut nailed it, they will tell you. In 1988, I was the vice president of the Science Fiction Writers of America, and it fell to me to organize our annual awards banquet in Santa Fe. We had two speakers that year. One of them was a 90-year-old writer, a veteran of science fiction's golden age, being given an Author Emeritus Award. The other was a games designer, a popular speaker at gaming cons, who believed that video games were a new art form in its infancy, an immersive art form that would eventually replace television, movies, even books. Why read a story or watch a story when you could live a story? It was an old science fiction concept, mind you, but now it was on the verge of becoming real. Magazines and books were dying. Instead of clinging to the past, the game designer challenged the audience to become part of the future and start writing video games instead. His ideas were provocative, certainly. Not everyone would agree. Some would be outraged, I knew. Others might be challenged. A few might even be persuaded. There would be a lot of interesting discussions later that night in the bar, I figured. What I did not figure is that the writers at the banquet would start to get up and leave before the speaker was 5 minutes into his speech. Only one at first, then a few more, then a whole table, then another. It turned into a steady stream. By the time the speaker was finished, there were hundreds of people in the bar and only a handful sitting at their tables, as you were. Orwell spoke of telling people what they do not want to hear. He never mentioned how little they would love you if you did. The members of SIFWA did not want to hear that books were obsolete and they should write video games instead. Though the last 20 years have suggested that maybe they should have listened. Video game designers make one hell of a lot more money than most novelists these days. Instead of engaging with the ideas they felt unpalatable or insulting, they left in droves. When the games designer finished his speech, the bar emptied again, and all those who left returned to their tables to hear what the elderly author emeritus had to say. Some of our locals had worried about bringing in a man past 90 to Santa Fe, fearful of how he might handle the altitude. They need not have worried. He drank all of us under the table, stayed up half the night, every night, and at the banquet he sprang to his feet and gave us a rousing, roaring paean to science fiction and the people who wrote it, his own heartfelt version of the Rosewater speech. He was greeted with thunderous applause and became the hero of the weekend. Wow. Ever since I got your kind invitation, I've been wrestling with the question, should I go Vonnegut and give a Rosewater speech tonight? Or dare I do an Orwell? I like thunderous applause as much as the next guy, but since I am being recognized for being a courageous communicator, well, shouldn't it be a little courageous? Maybe so. So I've screwed up my courage and tamped down my doubts and decided to speak about free speech. You remember free speech? We used to have it here in the United States, some of the time anyway, for some speech. There were certainly dark periods, though, the blacklist of the 40s and 50s, the First World War, when anti-war activists were arrested and imprisoned for speaking against American involvement, the presidency of John Adams, who signed the Alien and Sedition Acts. I think we may be living in one of those dark periods now. Before I say much more, in the times we now live, it seems that speakers are required to give warnings to their listeners, which I think is stupid and is certainly not in the spirit of the free and open exchange of ideas, but here we go. This is not a safe space. This will not be a safe speech. I may say things that some of you or all of you disagree with. You may hear things that offend you. One of George Carlin's 7 naughty words may slip through my lips. I may argue in favor of ideas and concepts you despise, or not. I don't know you well enough to know what you might despise and what you might applaud. I speak English, and only English, sadly. I admire people who are fluent in other languages, but that is not one of my talents. I almost flunked French in high school, and I can't even speak Dothraki. I don't speak equity language, however, and never will. If I happen to mention mummies, I will call them mummies and not mummified persons. If I speak of slaves, I will call them slaves and not enslaved persons. If you are triggered by hearing such words, consider this your trigger warning. Whether I am writing or talking, I don't like being told what to write or what to say or what words I may or may not use. I believe in free speech, free expression, free exchanges of opinions and ideas as strongly as I believe in anything. And here and now, in the year 2024, I fear that all these things are imperiled. Every time I open a newspaper or magazine or turn on my television, I'm reminded of the words of William Butler Yeats. Things fall apart, the center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world, the blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. Yeats was writing in a different time about different issues, but I think his words are more true today than ever before. You need only look about to see that the center is not holding, and that in that center are many of the things that I cherish most in the world: literature, art, journalism, freedom of thought and expression, the foundation on which democracy is built, a democracy that is itself in peril. Let me take you back to 1644. The year that John Milton, best known as the author of Paradise Lost, published Areopagitica, an eloquent and impassioned argument in favor of freedom of speech and expression. Most of you will have learned of it in school, or at least to have been quoted its most famous passage, wherein Milton says, "Let truth and falsehood grapple, for whoever knew truth put to the worse in a free and open encounter." Now, the superficial reading of that line is that Milton is saying, let's have freedom of speech, it's swell. But if we look back at the context, at the times he was living in Milton's personal situation, if we look at his actual words, it becomes a good deal more complicated. Let truth and falsehood grapple, he writes. Consider the words. Milton is arguing that readers should be exposed to falsehood as well as truth. This was revolutionary at the time, when the prevailing attitude was that some authority, the state, the church, the university, would determine what was true and what was false and make certain that we were not exposed, well, in newspeak, it might be called wrong think or bad think, even crime think. Don't let that be published or talked about. John Milton was a godly man and deeply concerned with matters of religion. This is reflected in the other interesting aspect of his famous quote, where he says, "Whoever knew truth put to the worse in a free and open encounter." In other words, he is telling us that if we allow truth and falsehood to contend, truth will surely prevail. This is an article of faith with him. Moreover, he argues, God endowed man with free will and a capacity for reason, and it is better for a man to come to virtue himself than have it imposed on him by some authority intent on shielding him from all toxic and harmful ideas. To be truly moral, he says, we must be free to grapple with immorality. Areopagitica was specifically arguing pre-publication censorship. English law at the time required writers and printers to obtain a license from the government before anything, books, poems, pamphlets, speeches, what have you, could be published. Needless to say, licenses were not forthcoming for anything the government thought subversive, obscene, or heretical, the church having a great deal of say in those days, and violators could be arrested, imprisoned, even flogged. Milton himself was one of those violators. In 1643, he had married, or perhaps was just engaged to, a 16-year-old he had met during his time as a schoolmaster, but they only lived together for a month before she moved back with her parents. He wanted a divorce, but English law only allowed divorce on the grounds of infidelity, impotence, or cruelty. And the Puritans and Presbyterians who controlled Parliament at the time were not about to change that, for fear that allowing more divorces would encourage promiscuity and, sex. Milton wrote a series of pamphlets making the case for liberalizing the divorce laws. But of course, he could not get a license to print any of them. He printed them anyway, anonymously and illegally. Had he been caught, he might well have been thrown in prison and flogged. His subsequent life might have been considerably different, and the world might never have gotten Paradise Lost. Later in life, by the way, Milton got in even more trouble for his views. This was the period of the English Civil War, when king and parliament fought for supremacy. You know, Cavaliers, Roundheads, all that. Oliver Cromwell and the Roundheads won. King Charles I was beheaded in 1649, and his heirs fled to the continent. In his place, Parliament abolished the monarchy and established a commonwealth with Cromwell at its head. Milton's political and religious leanings put him solidly in the Puritan camp, so much so that 2 weeks after the king's execution, he published a treatise justifying it. Oliver Cromwell died in 1658, however, and his son Richard was unable to keep the Commonwealth together. So in 1660, Parliament restored the monarchy and invited Charles I's son to return and take the crown, which he did. Milton was fervently against all of this and argued in favor of retaining a republic. For some reason, Charles II did not look kindly on the man who had justified his father's regicide and campaigned against the restoration. Once he was on the throne, all of Milton's writings were seized and burned, and Milton himself was arrested and imprisoned. He might have suffered worse, but he still had a few influential friends who got him released. Thereafter, blind, broken, and poor, he retired from politics and spent the rest of his life writing poetry rather than polemics. Paradise Lost, his masterpiece, was published in 1667. Needless to say, it was promptly banned. It has continued to be banned, off and on, and here and there, ever since. The Catholic Church banned it for more than 200 years, which is probably not surprising. Not only does the poem include a sex scene in a Garden of Eden, but is entirely too kind to Satan, by far the most memorable character. Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. Also, Milton had no use for Catholics. Yes, it's true. The author of Areopagitica was in favor of free speech, except for Catholics, who were wrong and should just shut the hell up. What can I say but that even the best of us is full of flaws and contradictions? I'm not at all sure I share Milton's faith that if we left truth and falsehood contend, truth will surely win. I know too much history for that. Sometimes the bad guys win. Sometimes saner heads prevail, but the fight for freedom of expression goes on in every land and every age, and the censors have many names. I could tell you about Thomas Bowdler, who produced The Family Shakespeare in 1807. Think of it as Bard Light. Shakespeare with all the nasty and naughty bits removed. For the women and children, of course. He is remembered today in the word Bowdlerize. Or we could talk of the silver screen and the scandalous films of the late 20s and early 30s that created such an outcry that the studios had no choice but to create the Hays Code, which prohibited profanity, nudity, graphic violence, sexual violence, and the ridicule of religion. Oh, and miscegenation too, and any mention of sexual perversity. Crime never paid under the Hays Code, and the sympathy of the audience was never to be shown to the criminals. The code was named after Will Hays, president of the Motion Picture and Producers Distributors of America, when it was adopted in 1930. But a man named Joseph Breen became its chief enforcer and kept movie moral for decades to come. But you can still catch pre-code movies on Prime and Netflix, and you should. The pre-code talkies are better in all respects than the ones that followed in the 30s, the movies that had been breened. Oh, and there's a lot I could say about a man named Frederick Wortham, a psychiatrist who wrote a book called Seduction of the Innocent, where he argued that horror and crime comics of the 50s were the cause of juvenile delinquency. Wonder Woman was into bondage. She wasn't, although her creator may have been. And Batman was a pedophile who was buggering his ward, Robin. He wasn't. That led to the congressional investigations, tens of thousands of comic books being burned in public bonfires from coast to coast, and the eventual formation of the Comics Code Authority, set up by frightened comic publishers to stave off the threat of government censorship. The Comics Code had a lot in common with the Hays Code, from which it borrowed heavily. For close on 30 years, the Comics Code protected us from hells and dams, sex and violence, crime and drugs, along with vampires, werewolves, and zombies. Stan Lee and Marvel finally broke ranks, as did Denny O'Neil with DC and Green Arrow, after which more and more publishers followed suit, until the authority finally gave up to ghosts. Ghosts were forbidden too. Archie and Jughead were the last guys to jump ship. That was in 2011. And today, book banning is on the rise as never before. According to the American Library Association, 4,240 unique titles were challenged, withdrawn, or removed from schools and public libraries in 2023, up 65% from the previous record of 2,571 titles in 2022. And the situation is just getting worse. Florida and Texas have not only removed hundreds of books from schools and libraries, they have passed laws that will allow librarians and teachers to be arrested and even jailed for giving students the titles the state has not approved. Iowa, where I taught journalism back in the 70s, has passed an equally draconian law, but thankfully a federal judge has prevented its provisions from taking effect. But of course, the ruling is being appealed and could well be struck down by a higher court. Similar laws are being considered and debated in 41 other states. Thankfully, I don't think New Mexico is one of them. Yay. Most of those will not pass, one hopes, but some will. The fiercest fights are being waged in schools as concerned parents, that's a quote, lobby to have the books they do not approve of stricken from class reading lists and removed from school libraries. Concerned parents is newspeak. Concerned parents are censors. There was a time not so long ago when teachers decided what books to assign to their students. The better teachers would alter and adjust the reading list, trying to fit the needs and interests and skill level of each member of the class. Sadly, that sort of teaching is an endangered species. Standardized testing led to standardized reading lists drawn up by school systems and school boards. 9th grade students must read this book and that book. All 10th graders got this title, and so on. Local governments began to get involved, and then state governments. Every school in the state must teach the same books. The result has been a growing uniformity, a canon drawn up by higher and higher levels of government. Teachers have less and less influence. Instead, we have politicians deciding which books we should read, and even more crucially, which books we should not read. What sort of books are being banned? Well, that depends on who is doing the banning. In Texas and Florida, the targeted books are often those with LGBTQ content, books concerned with critical race theory, sexism, and misogyny, and of course, anything considered too critical of religion. Any religion, really, although these days some religions are more dangerous to mock than others, as the staff of Charlie Hebdo could tell you if anyone was still alive. Paradise Lost still gets targeted now and then, though not often. It's a little too difficult and old and literary for most of the book banners to comprehend. Though I imagine if anyone told them that it was about Satan, they would start stroking their bonfires. Oh, and anything with sexual content is in trouble too. No porn in school, the ban chants. George Orwell and Kurt Vonnegut are both in the Banned Books Hall of Fame. John Steinbeck, Mark Twain, Ernest Hemingway, Judy Blume, Jack London, William Faulkner, Lord of the Flies, The Color Purple, The Catcher in the Rye, The Great Gatsby, Lolita, Gone with the Wind, Catch-22 are among the classics that ignorant and bigoted do not want their children to read. Along with 10 times as many books of more recent vintage by less famous authors, living authors, most of them, who feel the pain of being banned far more acutely than Orwell and Milton and Faulkner, who are, after all, long dead. Gay writers and writers of color are attacked more often than us white guys. Maus, the great graphic novel by Art Spiegelman, has often been challenged, whether by Holocaust deniers or fans of Nazi cats, I could not say, but someone does not like it. Fantasy, science fiction, and horror are often targeted. Neil Gaiman, Philip Pullman, Stephen King, Anne Rice, Ursula K. Le Guin, Ray Bradbury, Orson Scott Card, even Goosebumps and Harry Potter. Charlotte's Web has been targeted. Some people do not like talking spiders. My own novels have yet to be banned, so far as I know, but that may only be because the banning bros have no idea that they exist. I have no doubt that once they become aware of me, they'll be coming after Westeros. The book banners are ratcheting up their attacks as well. Time was they would go after a single title and focus on it, getting it removed from the course syllabus or the library shelves. Now some groups are turning in lists of 50, 60, or 100 titles they want gone. And across the nation, gutless school boards and administrators are caving into their demands. Entire libraries have seen their shelves swept clean. Often the school announces that the books have been removed pending review. But when and if the reviews will be complete and the books returned, no one can say. Meanwhile, the kids are left with nothing to read, but are those Dick and Jane books still, that they made us read in my day, still around? If not, there's always the Bible. Many of the book banners are Christian evangelicals motivated by religion. Yeah, let's fill the library up with Bibles after we rip out the Song of Solomon. A few years ago, PBS ran a contest called The Great American Read. 100 novels were chosen by a panel of scholars and critics, and the readers were invited to vote for their favorite. 10-hour-long segments were televised, wherein writers, editors, academics, and fans talked about the books they loved and why they should be chosen. It would not surprise me if every one of the 100 books on the Great American Read list had not been banned somewhere by someone, or at least targeted, which I believe made the show necessary as well as entertaining. It was a great series and one that I was proud to be a part of. Sales on all the chosen titles soared, and readers were encouraged to read authors they had perhaps never sampled before or even heard of. In my own segments, I urged the viewers to vote for Tolkien's Lord of the Rings and F. Scott Fitzgerald's Great Gatsby, two novels I've always loved, books that changed my life. Tolkien finished 5th, Fitzgerald 15th. My own series, A Song of Ice and Fire, was also one of the 100 favorite novels. I finished 48th. But hey, that's in the top half, and it was an enormous honor just to be nominated. And maybe I would have finished higher if I'd finished those last two books. The winner, the novel most loved by millions of readers and voters, was To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. Most of you have read it. Some of you may have voted for it. For decades, it has been on the reading list of most of the high schools in America. Today, there are strenuous efforts underway in many states and school districts to remove To Kill a Mockingbird from those classrooms and take it off the library shelves. Unsurprising, I know, considering all the other books being attacked, but there's one thing about this one that troubles me even more than the others. Historically, book banning has been a pastime of the right. But the efforts to remove Harper Lee from schools and libraries are coming not only from the religious right, but from the woke left as well, though obviously for different reasons. Now, politically, no surprise, I'm a liberal, have been for most of my life. I'm used to fighting against censorship from the right. Censorship from the left, though, that appalls me, confuses me, frightens me. The assaults on free speech from the other side of the political spectrum take other forms than pulling books off library shelves. Ray Bradbury, author of Fahrenheit 451, once said, "There's more than one way to burn a book, and the world is full of people running around with lit matches." Many call themselves progressives. They do not just remove books from libraries, they attack the books themselves, the text, the words. Look at what is happening to Roald Dahl. The current editions of his books, published by Puffin, a British imprint of my own publisher, Random House Penguin, features the following wording at the bottom of the copyright page. Words matter. The wonderful words of Roald Dahl can transport you to different worlds and introduce you to the most marvelous characters. This book was written many years ago, and so we regularly review the language to make sure it can continue to be enjoyed by all today. To which I might reply, words matter. In Roald Dahl books, the words that matter most are the words of the author, Roald Dahl. The words were written a few years ago, not many years ago. Dahl is not Chaucer, and he did not write in oldie English. But you should not start messing with Chaucer's words either. You're not reviewing the language, you're censoring the language. During his lifetime, Dahl told his publishers not to, quote, "so much as change a single comma in one of my books," end quote. It would have been nice if someone had listened to the explicit directions of the author in that regard, but no. Instead, Puffin Books hired sensitivity readers to go over all of Dahl's words, and they found plenty to be sensitive about in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Matilda, James and the Giant Peach, The Witches, The Fantastic Mr. Fox, and more. No one is fat in Dahl anymore, just enormous. Why someone thought that was better, I have no idea. And I speak as a guy who has been fat for most of his adult life. Not big-boned, not heavy, not large, not portly, and certainly not enormous, I would hope. Black was removed too, not in regard to someone's skin color or race, but rather the color of a tractor. Of a tractor. Terrible black tractors are now just terrible tractors. In the Puffin editions. I am surprised they allowed chocolate to remain in Charlie and the Chocolate Factories. It makes you fat and can kill dogs, you know. And Dahl got off comparatively easy compared to Dr. Seuss. Dahl lost a lot of his words, but Seuss lost 6 entire books, withdrawn from sale and never to be reprinted or published again, supposedly, for containing hurtful imagery. Dr. Seuss and Roald Dahl are both long dead. They were not consulted about these decisions, their estates were. But half a century in publishing has convinced me that while living authors care about their words, estates care only about money. Let us make no mistake. Sensitivity readers is newspeak. Sensitivity readers are censors. Censors never like to call themselves censors, though. Back in 1986, when I got my first job in television on the revival of The Twilight Zone, I had to deal with CBS network censors. They did not call themselves censors either, and bristled if you used that word, which we all did. The official name of their department was Standards and Practices. They read every script before filming and told us what we could and could not say, and what words we could use. By the 1980s, you could actually say damn and hell on television, but not too often. You could only say fuck on cable. You have 7 dams in this episode, and you're only allowed 5, they would tell me. And I would cut 2 dams and maybe a hell for a bonus. Once, I had a moldering corpse appear. Standards and Practices instructed me to make sure that she was not too moldering, elsewise the sight of her might scare the kids at home. I hope so, I thought. I wanted to scare the kids at home. Why else would I brought in a moldering corpse? But television censorship went beyond counting dams and hells. When Harlan Ellison adapted Knackles, a chilling Christmas fable by Donald Westlake, Standards and Practices shut it down days before filming was set to begin. Harlan was scheduled to direct the episode himself in what would have been his first time in a director's chair. He revised Knackles as ordered, addressing every single one of the notes given him by the network, fixing everything they had objected to. But the censors killed the episode anyway. Harlan quit the series in protest. Twilight Zone lost one of our best writers, and the world was robbed of the chance to see what he might have done as a director. The enemies of free speech wear many hats and go by many names. At the start of the speech, I made mention of dark times in American history, one of them being the period in the 40s and 50s that is sometimes called the McCarthy period. Although Senator Joseph McCarthy of Wisconsin, that vile toad, and please do not confuse him with Senator Eugene McCarthy of Minnesota, as sometimes I hear young whippersnappers doing, did not come into the fight until 1950, when he claimed to have a list of communists in the State Department. Tail Gunner Joe was late to the lynching, though. The Inquisition actually started 3 years earlier when UAC, the House Un-American Activities Committee, decided to investigate communists in Hollywood, which eventually led to the testimony of 10 prominent producers, screenwriters, and directors suspected of being red. The most prominent of them being Dalton Trumbo, at the time the highest paid screenwriter in Hollywood. It must be said, the 10 were not innocents. Some of them were members of the Communist Party of America. Some were former members who had resigned years before when Stalin made his pact with Hitler. Premature anti-fascists, they were called by the party and former friends. The ones who were not red were pink, that is to say, socialists or fellow travelers. They were all liberals and left-wingers, and several were staunch union guys who had helped found the Writers Guild a decade before. Though the 10 were not innocent of being red or pink, they were innocent of committing any crimes. It was not illegal to be a member of the Communist Party of the USA. Not in the 1930s, during the depths of the Depression, when desperate people in the USA, as in Europe, abandoned the mainstream political party by the millions, nor in 1947, when UAC summoned the 10 to Hollywood, though by then the party had shrunken considerably from the 70,000 members it had at its height. It should be stressed that the 10, even those who were still members of the CPUSA, were not spies or secret agents. They were quite open about their political leanings and made no effort to conceal their beliefs. Being a communist was no different, in their mind, from being a Republican or a Democrat. But by 1947, the Cold War had started, and anyone who had ever said good things about Uncle Joe Stalin was regarded with suspicion. Still, the 10 were not afraid. They went to Washington secure in the conviction that they had done nothing wrong. Many of them had prepared speeches they planned to deliver before UAC. All of them relied upon the protections they believed they had under the First Amendment to the Constitution, which said, Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or of the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. But the 10 had miscalculated. They were never allowed to give their speeches. UAC cut off every attempt. The members of the committee instead demanded that they answer questions about their CPUSA membership and affiliates. The 10 refused to answer, trusting to the First Amendment. Freedom of speech includes the freedom not to speak, they reasoned. The committee disagreed. The Hollywood 10 were found guilty of contempt of Congress and sent to prison. When they got out, they found their careers were over. Even those like Trumbo, who had big contracts to studios canceled by using the morality clause, arguing that belonging to the Communist Party of the USA was by itself immoral, though still not illegal, it should be pointed out. All the studio heads got together to declare that they would never employ reds or pinks. Those were the first hearings, but not the last. UAC kept summoning the elite of Hollywood for years to come. Producers, directors, writers, actors, the politicians loved the publicity the stars brought them. They wanted the witnesses to name names. Names they already knew in most cases. The purpose of the ritual was not to gather information, but to enforce submission. The so-called friendly witnesses complied and named names and were given UAC's blessing. Those who refused, the unfriendly witnesses, had learned from the example of the Hollywood 10. The First Amendment had proved a feeble shield. Instead, they used the Fifth Amendment against self-incrimination, which worked after a fashion, but also led to a widespread belief that being a communist was in itself a crime, which it wasn't. But it did not matter. Unfriendly witnesses were not sent to prison, but they were ruined all the same. That was how the blacklist was born. Those who refused to snitch lost their jobs, their careers, often their friends. They became unemployable, pariahs. It was almost as bad to hire an unfriendly witness as it was to be an unfriendly witness. If you were willing to work with a red, you must be a red yourself, so you would be blacklisted in turn. Safer to stay away from them. The blacklist lasted for more than a decade. Joe McCarthy, when he got into the game, put a different slant on things. He was looking for secret commies in the State Department, the Army, and the Voice of America, supposed traitors who were perhaps engaged in espionage, not writing movies. He was ultimately taken down by Edward R. Murrow and a lawyer named Joseph Welch. Have you no sense of decency, sir? Welch asked the senator during a televised hearing. At long last, have you left no sense of decency? The gallery burst into applause. The blacklist lasted longer and only came down when Otto Preminger and Kirk Douglas both hired Dalton Trumbo to write their movies, Exodus and Spartacus, respectively, and Jack and Bobby Kennedy went to see the latter and pronounced it a fine film. A decade's worth of fear seemed to blow away overnight, despite the fulminations of Hedda Hopper, the American Legion, and the Catholic Legion of Decency. It turns out the dragons of censorship had no teeth. These dark days in American history have always fascinated me. There are several excellent films about the blacklist period. Trumbo is the most recent, somewhat fictionalized account of the many events I just related. Good Night and Good Luck from 2005 dramatizes Edward R. Murrow facing down Joe McCarthy. The Front from 1976 stars Woody Allen and Zero Mostel in a fictional account of a restaurant cashier hired by a blacklisted writer to pose as the author of his latest script so he can sell it. Mostel and many of the other actors, writers, and producers involved in the film had themselves been blacklisted. The best account of the times, however, is nonfiction. Time of the Toad, Dalton Trumbo's account of the days of the blacklist. All these accounts have one thing in common: fear. People were afraid to defy the blacklist. You did so at your peril. It did not matter if you yourself were red or pink, whether you had ever done anything wrong. If you spoke up in defense of anyone who had been named in red channels or declared an unfriendly witness by UAC, you would soon be blacklisted too. Actors and writers whose contracts had been canceled by the studios tried to hire lawyers to sue and found few takers. Even the lawyers did not want to be seen defending Reds, no matter if they themselves were rock-ribbed conservative Republicans. People were afraid then. People are afraid now. And yes, I blush to admit, that includes me. Being named a Courageous Communicator has led me to examine my own actions and wonder if I should have done more, could have done more, spoken up, whatever. In February, Meow Wolf in Santa Fe was forced to cancel a sold-out concert by the Jewish hip-hop artist Mattis Yahoo. And I may get that name wrong because I'm not familiar with it. Mattis Yahoo is a strong supporter of Israel, and it appears he has said some things about the war in Gaza that some of the employees at Meow Wolf objected to. When the management refused to deplatform the performer, a large number of the workers walked out. Meow Wolf felt they had no choice but to cancel the show for safety reasons, since they had no ticket takers, bartenders, security, whatever. As it happens, I own a small percentage of Meow Wolf, along with the bowling alley where the House of Eternal Return is housed. I had never heard of Mattis Yahoo, though it appears that he's been around for 20 years. A critic for the Chicago Tribune wrote that his performance was, quote, a soul-shaking brand of dancehall reggae that captures both the jam band vibe of Fish and the ska punk of Sublime. I don't know what any of that is. I like Bruce Springsteen and the Beatles and the Creedence Clearwater Revival and, folks like that. Mattis Yahoo's lyrics are a mix of English, Yiddish, and Hebrew. And I don't speak Yiddish or Hebrew. But Mattis Yahoo has fans all over the country, even here in the Land of Enchantment. The concert was sold out, and it was canceled by people who felt he had lost the right to perform by stating his views on a war on the other side of the world. They had no compunction about denying others their right to hear him. And that incident was not a one-time thing. Mattis Yahoo was scheduled to perform the following day in Tucson, and that concert was also canceled for similar reasons. Those responsible for shutting down both these events have proudly claimed credit for it, when they ought to be ashamed. Deplatforming is newspeak for blacklisting. You do not need to listen to Mattis Yahoo's music. You certainly do not need to like it. I doubt that I would. You do not need to attend his concert or work at same, but you do not have the right to prevent other people from hearing him if they choose to do so. No matter what he said, no matter how much you disagree with his views on Gaza, even if you believe those views are wrong, evil, contemptible, I'm not saying they are, I do not know what he actually said about Israel and Palestine, but it does not matter. Alan Dershowitz said, freedom of speech means the freedom for those who you despise, and the freedom to express the most despicable views. It also means that the government cannot pick and choose which expressions to organize and which to prevent. Would that more people understood that. These sort of things are not just happening to one Jewish hip-hop rapper. All sorts of people are being silenced all across the country. Universities, once bastions of free speech, iconoclasm, and spirited debate, have become notorious for student protests against speakers whose views the student do not care to hear. In many cases, the protests have caused the schools to cancel the invitations. Even at Berkeley, where this free speech movement was born during the so-called turbulent 60s. You often hear that Voltaire said, I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. Actually, that was written by a woman named Evelyn Beatrice Hall, writing as S.G. Tallentire, who said that he said that in her book, Friends of Voltaire. That's the only place it appears. Maybe he said it, maybe not. It sounds like something he might say. And anyway, I agree with him, or her. We do know that Oscar Wilde said, "I may not agree with you, but I will defend to the death your right to make an ass of yourself." H.L. Mencken chimed in as well. The trouble with fighting for human freedom is that one spends most of one's time defending scoundrels. For it is against scoundrels that oppressive laws are first aimed, and oppression must be stopped at the beginning if it is to be stopped at all. Mencken was a bit of a scoundrel itself, as it happens. Noam Chomsky once said, Goebbels was in favor of free speech for views he liked, so was Stalin. If you're really in favor of free speech, then you're in favor of freedom of speech for precisely the views that you despise. Otherwise, you're not in favor of free speech. Salman Rushdie agreed. It's no trick to support the free speech of somebody you agree with or to whose opinion you are indifferent, he said. The defense of free speech begins at the point where people say something you can't stand. If you can't defend their right to say it, then you don't believe in free speech. I do not think anyone can possibly question Rushdie's commitment to free speech. Whether you love his books or hate them, he has stood strong against the censors and religious fanatics for half his life now, and most recently paid dearly for his principles when a hater leapt up on stage to try and kill him. There's a man who is a truly courageous communicator. In 2014, Seth Rogen and James Franco starred in a comedy called The Interview, about a CIA plot to assassinate North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un. Kim was not amused. Various dire threats were made, and every one of the major American theater chains caved for fear that their multiplexes would be bombed. The only theaters that dared show The Interview were a collection of independent movie theaters across the country. One of them, my own John Cocteau Cinema in Santa Fe. We played to packed houses all week, something that does not happen often at the Jean Cocteau. We had people coming down from Taos and coming up from Albuquerque to see the show. New Mexicans were not about to give in to bomb threats from North Korea. I got a lot of praise for showing that film, though I'm not sure it was entirely deserved. I did not believe for a minute that Kim Jong-un would bomb a 100-seat movie theater in Santa Fe, New Mexico. But if I'm trying to be honest, then I have to confess I have not been nearly as courageous when the issue of showing other controversial movies was raised. Back when I was just a patron at the JCC, and not its owner, Woody Allen movies were shown there regularly. These days, Allen cannot find any American distributor. I can't show his films even if I wanted to. I can't book them. No one can. And if I could, would I dare? Louis C.K. was also unable to find a distributor for 4th of July, the comedy he released in 2022. He offered the movie to any independent theater that cared to show it. Few did. We were not one of them. We did discuss the possibility, but the truth is, we were more afraid of cancel culture than we ever were of Kim Jong-un. Out there on the internet, I've often seen posts claiming that cancellation is not censorship. The First Amendment only prohibits Congress from passing laws restricting freedom of expression. So long as the state is not involved, no one's rights are infringed. Cancellation is a spontaneous response of ordinary people to, well, in Newspeak, they might call it wrongthink. And there's nothing wrong with making wrong thinkers suffer the consequences of their wrong thoughts. The same way Dalton Trumbo did, I suppose. All of us have freedom of choice. We can choose what books we read, what music we listen to, what films we watch. By what right do we presume to deny our fellow citizens the same freedom? I have vegetarian friends. There's one right there. I even know a few vegans who will tell you that meat is murder. Fine. They don't go to steakhouses. I don't eat Brussels sprouts. That's freedom of choice. My favorite vegetarian loves steakhouses for their cauliflower and cream spinach. One of my oldest and dearest friends, a fellow writer with whom I have often discussed these matters, tells me that she believes in free speech, but there must be limits, that hate speech must never be allowed. She's not alone in this belief. A number of states and various countries around the world have laws against hate speech. But who gets to define hate speech? Alexei Navalny, the outspoken Russian critic of Vladimir Putin, who died recently in the gulag where Putin sent him, was arrested and sentenced for extremist speech, which I gather is Russian for hate speech. When I visited St. Petersburg a few years ago at the introductory press conference, one of the journalists asked me, "What do you think of Vladimir Putin?" On that day, I figured I was not a very courageous communicator. I ducked the question. Had I answered, my tour might have been extended to include a visit to Siberia. I could have had the point next to Navalny. And then there is the issue of lies. Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's brilliant if twisted propaganda minister, once said, "If you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. A lie told once remains a lie, but a lie told 1,000 times becomes the truth." I would like to tell you that Milton was right and Goebbels wrong. If we allow truth and falsehood to meet in free and open encounter, truth will surely win, right? But then I look around and I wonder, tens of thousands of my fellow citizens actually seem to believe that Hillary Clinton ran a pedophile ring from a pizza parlor in Washington, D.C. Now, during the course of my career as a science fiction writer and fantasist, I've written about ghosts, alien intelligences, vampires, and dragons. None half so unlikely as Pizzagate. Some lies are harmless, to be sure. Let the flat earthers have their flat earth. If you want to say the moon landing was a hoax, have at it. If you want to insist the moon is made of green cheese, go right ahead. But there were 111 million COVID cases in the U.S. when last I checked, of whom 1,217,000 died. How many of those might have lived but for the lies spread by the anti-vaxxers and conspiracy theorists? And then there's Trump, our American Goebbels. No matter how many times he tells us that the 2020 election was stolen, it just isn't true. More than 60 lawsuits were filed after the election to investigate these claims in courts both large and small all across the nation, and every single one of them was thrown out. The steal is a lie that refuses to die. So what are we to do if we believe in free speech? Pre-publication licensing does not work. The Puritans pulled that. Do we arrest all the Pizzagators, flat earthers, and Holocaust deniers alike and send them to prison? Alcatraz is available. Or is it sufficient to insert words like false and disproven when reporting on the lies? I do not have a good answer to the question. The best we can do, I think, is simply grit our teeth and learn to live with hate and falsehoods, to meet them in a free and open encounter, debate them, disprove them, try to persuade others to our point of view, and hope that Milton was right and Goebbels wrong and the truth will prevail. But we should never, ever silence them. As Tyrion Lannister once said, when you tear out a man's tongue, you're not proving him a liar, you're only telling the world that you fear what he might say. So thank you again for this honor. Whether I've been worthy of it in the past, I cannot say. But I can promise that I will try to be worthy of it in the future. I need to do better. All of us need to do better.
What a fantastic speech. Yes, fantastic. And you wrote it for us. And I'm so honored that you will take the time to write something so thoughtful for us. So it is my honor to present the New Mexico Presswoman Courageous Communicator Award to George R.R. Martin for building new worlds and creating strong yet nuanced women characters in his fiction books and television shows.